My name is Althea Rao. I'm currently a PhD candidate at the Digital Art and Experimental Media Department at the University of Washington. And I've been here at the University at Buffalo since March 20th at the Coalesce Center for Biological Art as the artist in residence. I kind of like to say that I'm a person who does interesting things. It's always been difficult to define my practice and work using like one particular medium. So it's kind of easy to use that phrase. I would like to say that the center of my work is around the politics of knowledge production. And in the most recent years, I've been focusing on data and digital processes, algorithmic processes as the infrastructure that produce our knowledge and kind of mediate our experience with the world, how we perceive the outside world and how ourselves are situated in it. And to do that, I kind of engage with like a variety of mediums and methods. My first academic training was actually in journalism, and then I went to film school. So like writing, storytelling in general are things that I tend to engage with, but from there also going into performance, going into traditional craft, including like textile. I'm a huge fan of textile processes and ceramics. Most recently at Coalesce, I've been working with more than human beings like bacteria and plants, and try to have a conversation with them to see like what kind of agency can they bring into quote-unquote human-centered knowledge production processes. It's been very interesting at Coalesce because some of my thinking has shifted since I arrived, but I've been kind of collaborating with different type of biological wet lab since maybe the end of 2023. And then the lab that I was working with was at the University of Washington. They're a wet lab in the computer science department. And what they study is how do you encode human information as DNA molecules and then insert those DNA molecules into living bodies that are non-human. And they're kind of viewing this more as a data storage solution because the Earth is kind of running out of space for data centers. And then so if you store DNA, human information as DNA is a lot more dense. It requires a lot less space and maintenance, theoretically speaking. And so like that's kind of their approach. But then I was working with them. I thought this technology is very cool, but the more I was working with them, the more I start to think about the bacteria and plants that get these like human information molecules kind of inserted into their bodies, because these DNA molecules that's kind of coded with human information, those are synthetic DNAs, so they're kind of just, they don't really have the ability to instruct cell function. So when they're inserted into the body of a bacteria, they're kind of just like staying there. And the bacteria has no idea that's there. It doesn't do anything to the bacteria. The bacteria doesn't have any communication going on with this piece. It's almost like an appendix. And then it will take up extra energy every time the bacteria or the plant are trying to copy the cell. So I've been looking for a way that this beings on the microscopic scale and our human information encoded on the same scale can have some sort of meaningful conversation. And then when I first started working on this, I was working with yeast, and I thought because DNA is a sugar, so if yeast can metabolize this sugar, I would be more happy with that. Turns out that yeast doesn't really like to digest this type of sugar. It's a very particular type of sugar that requires specific metabolic processes. So I ended up working with this biological process that's called biofilms. Bacteria, like humans, they also like to live in communities. And then when different bacteria form communities, sometimes they develop this like physical structure that's film. So if you go to the lake, sometimes you can see this biofilm floating on the lake, or like sometimes they coat plant root in the soil, and then they develop like this type of symbiotic relationship with the plant. And in this process, bacteria actually have the natural tendency of sampling extracellular DNA that's kind of just floating around in the environment. So they would take it up and incorporate into the film as a building material. And then once the film is developed, they metabolize it. So I'm currently at the Coalesce, working with Solon and Paul there. I'm kind of using that process, but try to introduce this human message that's encoded as the DNA into that environment where bacteria are building film and like physical structures, and just see whether or not bacteria can initiate a process of utilizing this human information that's in the DNA form for their own purpose. And obviously they cannot really understand what we have encoded. Encoding itself, it's kind of an arbitrary process. It's language dependent. Usually there is a translation table. That none of this would make any sense to the bacteria. But and in the same way, like we can encode human information into DNA form and give it to the bacteria. With that same translation table, we can try to decode the entire genome sequence of the bacteria into human language, which probably wouldn't make any sense to us either. But I'm kind of toying with this almost futile and ridiculous communication process, and just see whether or not I can get a response from the bacteria community. I think if I have to trace the very origin of my interest in memory, it's probably from a conversation in 2022. It was Jesse Forrest. I think he was a postdoc scholar at visiting like the University of Washington. I don't remember the context of the conversation, but he said memory has weight, and I found this statement very profound. And when he was saying that, he meant that human memory are kind of neurological experiences, processes that happens in the brain, and then those neurons and brain cells has masses. So he said. He gave me an example. He said, for example, if there was a stadium and Beyonce gave a concert in that stadium, the entirety of all of the memory from all of the participants of that concert, the physical weight and mass of those people's brain cell recording this particular event about the Beyonce concert is probably much greater than any singular event that you can think. But just the idea of memory being this like very abstract thought versus the physical weight or biological infrastructure that is in our head, there is this tension that really draw me into a lot of the like kind of different iterations of probing experiments, I'd say, that I've done with this. I think some of my work were really interested in how the presence of ourself being documented as other people's memory about us versus digitized record or like any kind of written account about us that's documented either online or on paper. Those like the relationship with those in different forms and how things can decompose and re-enter into material cycles again. And so I think my interest in AI also started around that time, because when I think about our physical body and the matters and the thoughts that were held in these material, I can easily think about this body decompose and enter into the material cycle with nature. But what about those binary code data that's digitized, or that's stored on servers? How do they enter material processes again? And there was a time that I was working as a project manager, and in that project management job, like one of the tasks that I had to do was to onboard a digital asset management software for the company, because the company has been producing a lot of digital assets, but they have a very quick turnaround of people, so no one was there holding institutional knowledge. So things that were created are kind of just hanging around in Google Drive, and no one ever remembered that they were even created. And so that experience like made me question, like, what does it mean for something to have documentation? What does it mean for something to be remembered? And what does it mean for something to stay alive? And one of my favorite, like not favorite, but there was this scholar, her name is Diana Taylor. She made this distinction between the archive and the repertoire. The archive being things that are documented on paper. You can put a scroll on the shelf and they can be there forever. So in the sense, if we encode human information into DNA and put that DNA powder in a stainless steel vial and put it somewhere forever, those are archived. But the repertoire are memories that we held in the body. Those are, let's say, dance moves or oral histories, or stories that you hear from your parents, those ancestral wisdom that's passed on, like they need to be recited and then repeated. The story needs to be retold by a physical body to be kept alive. I'm interested in the tension between these two and have been thinking about like maybe like a way for digitized information to enter material cycle again. It could be through AI in any sense, because it's also AI kind of in a way function as like a slop. It chops up everything that's documented and have them regenerate into new things and new thoughts. This is not a perfect parallel metaphor, so I'm still thinking about it, but in a sense that like how, like sometimes people describe a biological process as wetware, as opposed to software, but also just thinking about what does it mean to perceive living being in the logic of machine, or like what does it mean to perceive our cognitive processes as information processing using what we understand a computer would do. In a way, I think our new technology and scientific discovery is in a way reshaping how we understand ourselves, and the kind of narrative we use to tell the story about ourselves as well.